Welcome to Nightmares and Grief, a place to explore and celebrate the darkness. Each episode, I'll read stories written by me, Derek Heisey. Today's episode is part 4 of my novel, To Make the World Obey. If you haven't listened to part 1 yet, I strongly recommend you start there. I've left a link to all previous episodes in the description. Last time, the criminal organization called the Friends tapped Johnny Fava, an unmade son, to track down the gang that attacked their operation. Temujin's cult began the process of breaking in Vicky, drugging her and making her question her very identity. Meanwhile, Detective Deborah Samson snapped, beating Peaches the pimp after he was uncooperative, backing out of giving them information about the mutilated woman in the dumpster. Deborah and Freddy were caught in a retaliatory assault by the Friends while interrogating Peaches, deepening her descent into gray areas of the law. We ended with Johnny questioning Jackie, one of the Friends' prostitutes and the mistress of its leader, garnering a lead on the men who attacked Rolling Hills. Where will Deborah's investigation take her? Will Johnny find Temujin's cult before the detectives? What's Temujin's next move? And will Bartu be able to keep his homicidal tendencies under control? Find out on today's episode of To Make the World Obey. This story is not a gentle darkness. It includes graphic depictions of violence, sexual themes, misogyny, kidnapping, abuse, and brainwashing. It examines the psychology of power in killers and victims alike and explores the way various forms of violence, physical and otherwise, transforms both the inflicted and the witness. If you are sensitive to intense graphic content, this series may not be for you. Now, settle in, check under the bed, and pour a drink for the skeletons in your closet. It's time to start. Deborah, December 10th, 2024. Freddy and Deborah started on Lucinda's trail early in the morning. The sex workers, trapped as they were in their nocturnal cycle, weren't on the streets when they began, so the two began at the station, each nursing a pot of coffee apiece. They found a surprising amount of information on her in the station files. Lucinda had been very cooperative with the police for 2 years, giving tips and reporting crimes as they occurred, always giving her stage name. She seemed to believe in her civic duties, which Deborah found interesting. Sex workers tended to keep their heads down and let their pimps take care of protection. Either Lucinda still believed in the system, or Peach's subordinates weren't doing their job. Lucinda reported robberies, domestic violence issues, fights in her apartment. The list went on and on. Then, a year before her murder, there was nothing. Lucinda vanished from the police record. After years of disappointment, Lucinda had given up on the system. Cynicism had killed the girl who became the woman Lucinda loved. It was a sad story, but at least they had a place to start. Deborah flipped open her notepad and scribbled pages of notes. Names, dates, incidents of interests, location. The two detectives had a long day ahead of them. Freddy went out to get them hamburgers for lunch. Deborah insisted on staying. When the food came, she put the bag on the floor so she wouldn't get grease on the papers. They ate in silence. Freddy kept his eyes on Deborah while he popped fries into his mouth. She kept the burger in her spare hand while poring over the reports. Freddy asked, "What was Lucinda's apartment? Something tree?" Deborah didn't answer. Her brow furrowed as she pored over the papers. She absent-mindedly took a bite of her burger. Freddy leaned over and tapped the desk. Gently, he said, "Hey, did you hear? What's Lucinda's apartment?" Startled, Deborah coughed on her food, covering her mouth. She took a sip from her Diet Coke and sputtered again. "Sorry, just got deep in it." "Yeah, I noticed." Deborah threaded her fingers through her hair and rubbed her eyes. "I think I'm going to dream in police reports tonight." Freddy checked his phone. It's late enough. You want to get out of here and check out her place? Deborah nodded. Sure, let's go beat those streets. They were quiet for the drive. On the way, they stopped by some of the other places of interest from Lucinda's reports, but turned up nothing. The people she named in the reports were no longer at the listed addresses. Halfway through the search, Deborah slammed the door when she got to the driver's seat and glared over the wheel, which groaned as she wrung it. Freddy swallowed his initial instinct to put a hand on her shoulder. Instead, he said, "At least it's on the way." Deborah glared at him. Cinnamon Tree was an old institution in Peach's territory. Built from faded pink brick, long black stains streaked down from the acid rain. The place touted a small amount of infamy for its criminal occupants and was known among fresh cops as a place to crack skulls on a bad day. The receptionist was a gaunt man with wide aviator-style glasses too big for his balding head. He seemed to hunch over himself like a cooked shrimp, or as if the weight of his worries was too heavy for his spine to support. When the bell above the entrance jingled, he jerked up and blinked, his face cast with impatience like they'd interrupted something. "Can I help you?" he asked. The two detectives showed him their badges. "We're investigating a homicide," Deborah explained, fighting against the urge to wrinkle her nose. She didn't think the man knew how to buy or apply cologne. The odor burned her throat. The receptionist shook his head. "You've got the wrong place. No one's been killed here for months." "It was one of your residents," Freddy replied. "If they weren't killed here, I don't think we can help you. It's the culture of the neighborhood. People keep to themselves." Deborah powered through the thin man's resistance. "What was the apartment number of Lucinda Love?" The receptionist squinted at her. "I don't think we had anyone with that name." "It's a big complex. You mind looking?" The receptionist sighed and pulled in the corners of his mouth. "I guess. Let me see what we got." His keyboard crackled like a bonfire as his long, nimble fingers swept across it. "No, Lucinda Love. Sorry." "That was likely a fake name. Do you have anyone who hasn't shown up in a few days?" The receptionist scrunched up his cheeks to push his glasses higher up on his face. "You're gonna have to be more specific." Freddy leaned over the desk. "What's your name?" The receptionist was taken aback, like he'd been so focused on Deborah that he hadn't even noticed Freddy had come in with her. "Malcolm," he said. Freddy nodded and gave him a smile. "Malcolm, what do you get paid to manage this dump?" "Probably not enough for all you have to do, right?" Malcolm scoffed. "No, not even close." "Pretty dangerous around here, huh?" Malcolm nodded. "Last thing you want to do is muddy the waters and help a couple of cops on top of all the other stuff you gotta get done today." Stiffening, Malcolm didn't respond. He must have suspected a trap. Freddy picked up on it and eased off the desk, shaking his head and waving his hands in front of him. No, don't worry. I'm not gonna be a jerk. But listen, Malcolm, I'm gonna tell you something. Our lead ends with you. If you can't help us, the trail goes cold. You're in a very important position, Mal." Freddy grinned. "Mind if I call you Mal?" The receptionist nodded. "Sure, nobody calls me Mal." "I think it suits you. You look like a Mal." Deborah joined in. "It does. It's a sexy name. Strong and manly. Too busy to say the other syllable. No time for that. Mal's got shit to do." Freddy snaked his hand into his coat. When it reappeared, it slid flat across the faux wood. He lifted it to reveal the stern face of Ulysses S. Grant in grayscale green. "We need you to help us, Mal, so maybe we ought to help you, too. Malcolm, seeming all ready to change with the shortening of his name, eyed the bill with some suspicion before glancing at Freddy, who let his grin broaden. He maintained contact as his hand shot out and snatched the bill, stuffing it into his pocket. "I'll see what I can do. No promises." Freddy stood up straight and put his hands up. "Hey, no problem. We know there's only so much a man can do, right? Do you have a photo? That might help." Freddy grimaced. "She got messed up pretty bad, man. I can show you, but I don't think..." Mal shook his head. "I don't want to see it. I seen too much fucked up shit this week." He tacked away at the keyboard. "What time are you looking at? When would she have gone missing?" "About a week ago. She would have kept unusual hours, if that helps." Freddy leaned on the word unusual, and Mal nodded to indicate he understood. "Your best bet is apartment 32C, he said after some searching. "And if that doesn't work, you want 12C. Deborah asked. "Are you certain?" The sound of the keyboard stopped, and Freddy squeezed in. "I'm sure Mal knows what he's doing. He looks like a smart guy." Mal nodded. "I'm certain it's 32C. The girl who lived there had long blonde hair and poor taste. She was young, probably a better fit for a girl who'd have the kind of unusual hours you're talking about. Rent is due and she hasn't paid it. Hasn't answered the door when I've come to collect it." "Thanks, Mal." Freddy extended his hand and the receptionist took it with gusto. His little eyes beamed. Freddy added, "You have a great night, okay?" "You too, detectives. Good luck." "Oh, we'll need it." Freddy laughed and pretended to wipe sweat off his brow. Mal smiled and laughed with him. After taking the key, Freddy and Deborah headed to the direction Mal had indicated. Once they were safely out of earshot of their new friend, Freddy murmured, "That's how you do it." Deborah gave Freddy a look. "What?" His face was grim. "I don't know what's going on with you, but I don't like it. You've been doing some pretty fucked up things, Deb, and it doesn't have to be like that. You're taking shortcuts, and it's scaring me. And you're giving bribes. You hate giving bribes." "Desperate times." "Same here." Freddy held out his hand and shook his head. "Don't. It's not the same." Deborah thought about Peaches and how his body felt beneath her boot, the way it bent so easily. It was remarkable that people were so fragile. "I'm going to do what I have to do to get the job done, just like overseas." Freddy met her gaze with concern. "We're not overseas anymore, Deb. I think you're forgetting that." The scent of blood filled Deborah's nostrils from her memory. The sight of the little body taped out in the cereal aisle flashed across her mind's eye. Her thoughts broke at the sound of Freddy's voice. "We're here," he said, placing a gentle hand on her arm. He raised his hand and knocked beneath the metal placard reading 32C. They waited. Deborah reached for the keys, but Freddy shook his head and held out a hand. He knocked again, and when there was still no response, he opened the door with the receptionist's key. "If we weren't nice to that guy back there, how were we gonna open the door? Huh? Kick it down?" Deborah pushed past him and entered the apartment. "Let's see what we can find out about this girl." Lucinda's apartment had the look of a place that wasn't lived in much. There was a tiny TV set propped on top of a plastic crate. Its screen was gray with dust. Across from it sat a futon mattress with sheets and a comforter tangled together. Beside that was a stack of old books with library classification stickers on the spine. The pantry held a few boxed meals, but nothing much beside. Lucinda didn't cook a lot. Takeout boxes overfilled the stinking trash can. When Deborah saw the dirty cups in the sink, her heart broke a little. Lucinda had left that night, expecting to return. Freddy crouched by the little TV and wiped a finger across the dust. I don't know if we're gonna find a whole lot. She probably didn't spend much time here. There has to be something. Deborah said it more to herself than as a reply. She needed there to be something. Freddy stood and shrugged, moving on to the closet. Deborah found nothing in the kitchen. She went to the futon and sat on it. The book on the top of the stack was Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. Along with a GED test prep manual, it sandwiched a collection of novels that a high school girl might read. Fantastic female characters striving through fantastic worlds in order to overcome fantastic odds. Adventure, romance, escapism. Deborah closed her eyes and pictured how profoundly unhappy Lucinda must have been. She wondered if this was how her sister was like toward the end. Freddy collected the library books. What are you doing? I'll return them. I get the sense she'd want me to. She would. Both detectives whirled around to face the voice at the door. It belonged to a tall young man with dark clothes and dark hair, his head hanging so low that his whole body hooked like a loping question mark. Hello? Did you know Lucinda? Can you help us? The man hesitated, then raised his face. Who are you? I'm Detective Samson. We're looking after Lucinda. Is she all right? Deborah took a few steps forward and gestured to the apartment. Do you want to talk in here? Can I ask who you are? Mark, the young man said. He scratched the back of his head and averted his eyes to the corner of the room. I can come in for a while. There weren't any chairs for them to sit on, so Mark and the detective stood in the living room between the futon and the television. The door was closed and the windows were shut. The room was sealed and stale. The scream of sirens kept diligent sentinel over the ambient hum of the refrigerator and the rumbling heater. Mark repeated his question. Is Lucinda all right? Did you know her well? We were sort of dating. Mark pressed his lips together tight and sighed through his nose. His eyes grew hard and dull. I assume that, by dodging my question, she's not okay. What sort of trouble is she in? Do you have a warrant? Freddy gestured to the futon. Sit down, Mark. It's pretty bad. He did as he was told. Freddy and Deborah helped each other tell him the situation in as sanitized a way as possible. Mark took the news better than Deborah had anticipated. He buried his face in his hands and was silent for a time. When he raised his face again, his eyes were red, his cheeks were moist, and his palms glistened. Not once had he made a sound. So you're looking for who did it? His voice was hard and low. It had the stony, angular edges of grief. Deborah nodded. We didn't know who she was until last night. I'm sorry we couldn't get a hold of you sooner. Do you know what? The words caught in Mark's throat. He looked away. Deborah took a seat beside him and rubbed his back. Swallowing, Mark pinched the bridge of his nose and continued. Do you know what she did for a living? Yeah. And you're still looking? He turned to her, confused. Deborah returned the expression. Of course we are. Why wouldn't we? Candace, that was her real name. Candace always used to say that cops didn't care about prostitutes. She said... Deborah's gaze softened and she squeezed his shoulder. I care. My sister did it too. Freddy looked at Deborah, but Deborah ignored him. Every iota of her attention was on Mark. Mark bobbed his head. Thank you. Thank you. You said your sister did it, like past tense. How'd she get out? She didn't. There were a few beats of silence. Then Mark seemed to understand. I'm sorry. That's sad to hear. Freddy crouched down in front of him. Can you tell us anything about her? About Candace? Anything at all that you can think of? It'll help. His voice cracking, Mark said. She thought J.K. Rowling was the best writer in the world. Her favorite flowers were daffodils. Was she close to anyone? Mark rubbed his face. Other than me? I don't really think so. She talked about this woman she worked with, a lady close to retirement. I forget her name. Mark groaned and kneaded his forehead as if to coax the name to the surface. Mary, he said at last. That was her real name. She went by Cat on the street. She helped Candace a lot. Took care of her. Watched out for her. Let her pimp know if something wasn't right. That kind of thing. Do you know how to get a hold of Mary? Any way to contact her? Mark shook his head. No, I'm sorry. I don't know how much help I'm going to be. Then he snapped his fingers and shook his head. Yeah, wait. I know the corner she works. Where is it? Tingley and Mirth. And Candace always joked about it. I think she got the jokes from Mary. Deborah rubbed his back again. Thank you, Mark. We're gonna do our best to get this guy. Can we call you if something comes up? Maybe we'll need to ask you more questions. The sadness in Mark's face vanished, and a dark storm rolled over his eyes. The light inside them crackled with electric fury. You find this son of a bitch and you kill him. You kill him on the spot, because if you don't, I will. And they'll never let me out after they see what I do. Deborah didn't answer. Neither did Freddy. Deborah gave Mark's shoulder another squeeze and said that he should get some sleep. Both detectives gave the young man their card and told him to call for anything, whether it was a tip or he just needed someone to talk to. Absently, Mark took the cards. Turn the light off when you leave, he instructed, laying down on the bed. He wrapped himself in the bedding and curled into a tight ball. Deborah turned off the lights like he asked. Johnny, December 10th, 2024. Johnny stopped at the drive-thru for a cheeseburger before heading to Rolling Hills to follow up on the van. He didn't get fast food often. His dad used to say it was a decadent waste of cash and that it was better to go hungry than to buy a burger. But the van was a good lead, and he'd earned the reward. Cheeseburgers made Johnny feel good. He unwrapped it before he pulled out of the drive-thru and ate it on the way. He only got the burger, though. No fries, no drink. Johnny was already preparing to work it off later with the barbells once he got home. He probably wouldn't eat much for dinner either. With its neon sign sleeping in a near-empty parking lot, Rolling Hills was a sad sight in the daytime. Still, the fuzzy boom, boom, boom of the music rumbled the asphalt as he walked up. Cosmo was nothing if not determined. He already had the place back up and running. The fuzzy boom transformed into syrupy bass when Johnny opened the thick, windowless door. One whiff of the club's sweat and pussy stink, and Johnny already wanted to leave. Bobby the bouncer pushed off the wall and gave Johnny a smile, handshake, and hearty backslap. Bobby was good people. He and Johnny had gone to high school together. It was Johnny who'd gotten him the job at Rolling Hills in the first place. Before he let Johnny's hand go, Bobby said, "It's great to see you, Johnny, but I gotta confess, it's a pretty shitty day here. You might be better off going somewhere else." Relax, Bobby. I'm here for work. You can actually help me. Bobby beamed. No shit? Absolutely none. I'm here because of the other day's problem. The smile on Bobby's face withered even faster than it blossomed. "Oh," was all he said. His gaze dropped to his shoes and he shoved his hands into his pockets.
Nah, don't try it.
Johnny patted his shoulder.
Don't try it.
"I know you and Mike were close."
Nah, don't try
Bobby asked Mike to cover for him that night. Everyone knew he'd taken it pretty hard when he heard about the decapitation.
Don't try it.
Bobby studied the floor and rubbed his nose. The big guy sniffed.
Don't try
I'm okay. I'm gonna find those bastards." Bobby nodded again. "I promise. I'm gonna find them." "Yeah. Can you help me?" The smile came back to Bobby's face. "Yeah. Sure thing, boss. What do you need?" Johnny patted his arm. "You're a smart guy. I bet you see all kinds of shit. Leading up to the thing, you ever see an old van, Bobby?" "I wasn't there that night, Johnny. Mike was, God rest his soul." Johnny blinked. He didn't know how cops did it. Everyone was the dumbest piece of shit on the planet once you got down to asking them questions. I mean the days before, maybe even further back. Some of the girls went out to it sometimes. "Like a minivan?" Johnny shook his head. He let Bobby think. You mean like a band van? From the 80s, those big vans they used to paint up and take to shows?" Johnny snapped his fingers and pointed at heavy Bobby. He nodded and grinned. "Yeah, that's it. It's like the kind of van you think about when you think about vans." "I seen one, Johnny. I know exactly what you mean. I was a mechanic at the chop shop. I used to love those things. There was an old black Chevy in '87, I think. Started coming on Tuesdays, but after that, a little bit. It came every day." Bobby shrugged. "I don't know who drove it, Johnny. I'm sorry. It was just some guy who looked like he worked out a lot." Johnny placed a reassuring hand on Bobby's shoulder and flashed another half grin. "Don't sweat it, Bobby. You're doing great. You're a lot of help, believe me, pal. Tell me, the parking lot has cameras, yeah?" Cosmo's office was stuffed with file cabinets collecting dust, and there were dry, crinkling papers scattered upon the desk around the ancient computer framed with a collage of full-spread nudie magazine pinups. They were the only things in the room that appeared recent. Johnny sat in the little swivel chair behind the little desk, his feet propped up on a box. He was dug in for the long haul. Finding the van among the endless hours of footage was tedious as hell, but Johnny grit his teeth and muscled through it. After the first couple of hours, he sent Bobby out to get him a new pack of Winstons, and later, when he was starting to fall asleep, he gave Bobby a 10 to get him a couple of energy drinks. Cosmo came in to check on him a couple of times. "You're working too hard, Johnny Bean. Take a break. Let me get you a girl." Johnny declined both times. Both times, Cosmo's brow knitted with concern, patting him on the shoulder and leaving him to work. It was worth it, Johnny thought. Worth it to be made. He thought about his old man. He'd make him proud in heaven. He had to. Johnny lost track of how long he'd been at the computer monitor, measuring time by the number of smokes he had left. Everything around the monitor's halo of light faded away after a time, and Johnny thought he was losing his mind. Sometimes, he swore he'd captured a glimpse of the van in the corner of the screen, and he'd catch himself leaning his head to the side as if looking around the corner to get a better view. What a payoff, though. When he finally snagged a good picture of the big black Chevy, his heart stopped in his chest and his brain exploded with victorious dopamine. He launched himself out of the creaky chair and pumped his fists into the air. He whooped and did a little dance in the tiny room. "Hoorah, bitch! Ass-licking, cock-cucking shit dick! I found you, motherfucker!" It felt good to be right. It felt better than hamburgers. Cosmo peeked in, and before he could speak, Johnny announced, "I fucking found it, Cos!" Cosmo put a weathered hand to his chest. "Christ, kid, I thought you had a fucking aneurysm. I got worried." Johnny spun his hand like he was reeling in a fish. Kaz, you got a printer in here? The old gangster pointed. Yeah, under the fucking desk. You've been here so long, I'm surprised you two didn't fuck. Johnny printed out 2 copies of the still image on the monitor, his face still plastered with a big, triumphant grin. He couldn't remember when any achievement excited him this much. Beneath the desk, Johnny's eager hand hovered at the mouth of the dusty printer as it coughed up the grainy photo. One more thing, Kaz, he said. Does that worthless Mick cop still hang out here? Ryan Kennedy was a tired beat cop and a fixture of Rolling Hills. He had 2 ex-wives, a burgeoning problem with alcohol, and a sister who had almost given up on him. He was a bad cop, but not bad enough to justify sacking him. He was perfect for the Friends. They threw him a couple $100 when they needed him, and Cosmo let him have free pussy sometimes. He worked harder for them than he did for the department. The PA blared Bad Girlfriend, and Bambi danced to a thin, mid-afternoon crowd that seemed to look right through her. It was a shame. Bambi was good-looking. Day shift was always rough on the girls. Johnny scanned the handful of faces, searching for Kennedy. Aside from the uniform, it was easy to pick him out. His expression was long and flabby and perpetually dour, like a basset hound's. In fact, everything about Kennedy was reminiscent of a basset hound. He had short, round limbs, sagging jowls, and heavy bags under exhausted eyes that made him seem a decade older. Ryan Kennedy had the look of a man who'd lost his game of life long before it had really begun. Johnny clapped a hand on the officer's shoulder, startling him out of some reverie, and then offered his hand for a shake. Officer Kennedy! What a coincidence! You're just the man I wanted to see! Kennedy's eyes glittered a little, but he didn't return Johnny's smile. What can I do for you? He asked. His voice was low, and it was a little hard to hear him over the music. On stage, Bambi's heavy heels clopped together like hooves. She twisted her legs around the pole and pinched it with her knees. The curls of her long blonde hair flailed as she spun around and around. Johnny thought about horses on a carousel. He brought his attention back to the cop. You want to run some plates for me? Kennedy's eyes went back to Bambi. He squinted. I could do that. Johnny followed his gaze and watched Bambi dance a little. I'll get something set up for you, pal, Johnny told Kennedy. He slid a printout of the black van across the table. Kennedy slipped it and the money hidden beneath it into his pocket without taking his eyes off the blonde on stage. Appreciate it, friend. His eyes lingered on the girl for a little longer, then they went back to Johnny. I'll get on this and let you know. Johnny patted him on the shoulder as he stood. It's an '87 Chevy. Don't see many of those anymore. Kennedy turned back to watch Bambi. Right. He sipped his whiskey. At the end of Bambi's song, he seemed to notice that Johnny hadn't left. Do you need something else? Johnny pulled his eyes off the retreating dancer and clapped Kennedy on the shoulder. He gave him a big plastic smile and shook his head. The music blared for the next song, and he muttered, Nothing you can give me, you lousy bastard. Kennedy nodded, not really hearing, and went back to his drink and the girls.
Deborah, December 10th, 2024.
The corner of Tingley and Mirth was obviously chosen as a joke, but it was a good spot for a sex worker. There were bars nearby, and it was near the industrial part of town, so there were regulars coming by from the factory. Mary clearly knew what she was doing. Deborah studied her as she pulled up to a space across the street. She was dressed in leggings and old fur-lined boots, a puffy winter jacket, and, despite the cold, she wore a low-cut crop top that exposed a glittering navel piercing on a chain. She wore heavy makeup, but it seemed to be drawn in a way to hide the bored expression on her face. She'd done this a while, but that didn't mean she had to like it. Mary eyed their car as Deborah put it in park and shut it off. When the two detectives stepped out, she shoved her hands into the pockets of her jacket and used them to pull it closed. She didn't look away, but she didn't look at them, angling her head as if she were purposefully ignoring them. Deborah smiled at her. "Are you Mary?" She shot Deborah an arched eyebrow. "Who wants to know? Cops?" "I'm Detective Deborah Samson, and this is my partner, Detective Plum. We wanted to ask you a few questions." Mary shook her head. "No thanks, detectives. I'm waiting for a ride and I don't want to be late." Freddy flashed her a smile. "Maybe we can get you where you need to go." Mary scoffed. "Thanks, but that's not the kind of ride I'm looking for." Deborah appreciated the woman's coy bluntness. "We don't need much time. Maybe we can make it worth the hassle." Mary turned to face Deborah with full attention now. "What have you got in mind?" "How about some food? My partner and I can take you out." Mary's expression remained unchanged. They were going to have to do better. Freddy said, $50 in dinner. How about that?" Sucking on her cheek, Mary eyed Freddy as she considered the offer. Deborah could practically read her thoughts as if they were scrawled across her face. What did they want? What was the chance she'd miss some real action by leaving? Was it worth it to get out of the cold? She asked, "What do you want to talk about?" "I'm not interested in talking about myself. It's a big, boring story." "Were you friends with a woman named Candace?" Freddy asked. Mary's face remained bored and stoic, but her eyes glinted with momentary memory. "I never knew a woman named Candace." Deborah pulled a picture up on her phone that Mark had texted her. Mary had to lean in and squint to make it out. "She worked as Lucinda," she explained. "Lucinda Love. Her boyfriend seemed to think you two ladies were close." "I don't get close to girls who work," Mary said, straightening up. She took out a stick of gum and popped it into her mouth, chewing with excessive motions while keeping her gaze steady. "But I might have known her." "Let's get you out of the cold then," Deborah suggested. "We'll all go to a diner, get some coffee in you, and if you want, we can come drop you back off." Mary considered the option with hard uncertainty. But why, wondered Deborah, was she so uncertain? Why, other than the fact that they were cops, would she withhold information? Finally, Mary sucked on the corner of her mouth, cast a glance between the two detectives, and nodded. "Yeah, sure. Why the fuck not?" She jabbed her head in the direction of their car and then added, "Lead on, Patton." Freddy took that to mean him, apparently, and he started walking. Deborah still took the driver's seat, though, and she didn't comment once. They went to a little local place with white tile on the walls split across the middle with a line of red. It was close, and despite being in a dingy part of town, it was still clean. A morose man, probably the owner, sat them in a booth at the far corner without asking. He must have seen this a million times in his life. Deborah had hoped it wasn't too obvious, but they were clearly a couple of cops buying dinner for a sex worker. It had to have been written in their body language, the way their limbs whispered to one another at a staunch distance, and the hard grimaces painted across their faces as they walked in. This was clearly not a social call. The three of them sat down in the deserted restaurant, Freddy on one side with Mary across from him as Deborah slid in beside her. The old man passed out menus.
"I'm Dale,"
he said, addressing Freddy.
"I'll be your server tonight. You want coffee?"
"Yes, 3 please," Freddy replied.
"Cream or sugar?"
"Mine with both. She'll take it black." Freddy gestured to Deborah and then let his hand hover as he waited for Mary to speak. She ordered hers with cream. Dale nodded and said he'd be right back. Freddy leaned over the table with his broad smile and said, What can you tell us about Candace? Mary pulled a napkin from the dispenser at the table and spat out her gum. I told you, I don't know a girl named Candace. Deborah laced her fingers together. Lucinda, then. Tell us about her. Give me a chance to look at the menu. Mary went straight to the breakfast portion and ran a long red acrylic down the items. She sighed, apparently unable to find what she was looking for, and drummed her nails against the linoleum table. 50s rock shimmied from the speaker above their heads. At last, she closed the menu and said, What to tell? She shrugged. It's an old story. You've probably seen it in the movies. Young girl runs away, sells her cunt, finds some old whore to show her the ropes, and then gets too deep. She clicked her nails against the table. That's about it. She got into trouble? Deborah asked. She was naive, that's all. What was she naive about? Deborah turned in the booth to face Mary, aware of the trapping effect it had. Maybe I should ask you who she was naive about. Dale arrived with the coffee and moved quickly, apparently aware of the silencing effect his presence had. Mary became interested in her acrylics, but before Dale could escape, she snapped her fingers. I want Belgian waffles. You think you can do that? It's pretty late, ma'am. I didn't ask for the time, Magoo. I asked if you could make me Belgian waffles. Dale scratched his cheek and looked at Freddy as if for a cue. Deborah sipped her coffee, and Freddy perused the menu. I guess I can do that, Dale said. You want anything on the side? Yeah, sausage and eggs. How do you want your eggs? Scramble the little fuckers. Dale nodded and scurried away as suddenly as he had come. Freddy asked, Do you know where she was from? Mary's shoulders relaxed and she snorted. Not for here, that's for sure. I think she said she was from someplace in the Southwest, maybe Arizona or New Mexico. New Mexicans love it up here, did you know that? All kinds of transplants from there up here. Kids down there talk about Seattle and Portland like they're Mecca. Freddy said something trite about the grass being greener and smiled, but to Deborah, his words faded into static. She searched for another casual opening to her question. She'd hit on something. Mary flinched or tensed or something, and that was the direction they needed to go, not the weak small talk about past locations. It didn't matter if Candace or Lucinda or whatever they were calling her came from Albuquerque, Phoenix, or Vegas. She was dead, and someone here had killed her. If a psycho ex-boyfriend had chased her all the way up to Washington and then went back down to his mud hut and son, there was nothing Deborah could do about it. This lead couldn't be a dead end. She wouldn't let it. Before Freddy could continue, Deborah wedged the question back in. What about the trouble she got into? It wasn't nearly as smooth as she'd wanted it, and she was worried she'd given Mary too good a look at her hand, but Freddy had fucked it up, and it was the best she could do. Mary shrugged. She talked about some clients who got too obsessed, and she had some trouble getting used to the life, but, you know, nothing crazy. She hadn't looked at Deborah since she asked the question. Wide-eyed and harried, Mary stared at the black surface of the coffee, and Deborah wondered if she saw something more than her reflection there. Taking another sip of her own coffee, Deborah let the silence hang a little, and then she threw the punch. Mary, the girl is dead. Somebody cut her up and ditched her in a dumpster. Lucinda got into something crazy. You're tense, and while your nails are lovely, I don't think you need to be studying them so much. I think you're hiding something from us. Mary's face, already cast with deep, stubborn lines, now pulled back, stony and tense. Both corners of her mouth caved in as she sucked them and glared at Deborah. You're the muscle of this operation, aren't you? You're the tough guy. Deborah's glare didn't ease up. Freddy jumped in. Actually, she's the brains and the muscle. I'm just a good-looking guy. Talk to us, Deborah said. "We're not interested in busting a sex worker with too many miles on her bumper. You're not going to get into trouble." Mary's hard face cracked open, revealing the volcanic smile beneath. "You? You think I'm afraid of you?" She laughed. "Honey, I've been doing this too long to be afraid of cops." "Then who are you afraid of?" "The bastard who did it, of course," Mary scoffed. "Wouldn't you be? I heard he might be one of the lunatics who shot up the Fred Meyer." That wasn't the answer Deborah had been expecting. Afraid of Peaches, maybe, or his goons, but she hadn't thought about the murderer himself. "Do you know who did it?" Mary shook her head. "No, honey. I've got some ideas with fake names on them, but I don't know who exactly. Do I need to? Do I need to be any less afraid of someone I don't know when they can do to me what they did to Lucy?" His voice like down, Freddy replied, "We'll protect you, Mary." It was his turn to receive Mary's wrath. "Oh, you will? What are you gonna do? Put me in witness protection? You gonna give me a new name and give me a fresh new start working at a Starbucks in Florida?" Mary's hair whipped across her face. "No, none of that's happening, and don't you dare tease me by lying. I've heard too many lies. I could live off them if they tasted any good. I'll take my chances on the street, thank you. Lucy was young and pretty, and I'm neither anymore, so I'm safe as long as I keep my head down." Dale came by with the waffles. Mary muttered her thanks and set to eating. Dale asked, "Can I get you guys anything else?" "More coffee, please," said Freddy. "Sure thing." For a while, there was nothing between the three of them but the table, the music, and the clink and scrape of Mary's fork and knife. She may have smacked her gum like an ox, but she chewed her food like a cat. Deborah said her name a few times, but Mary didn't respond. Dale came by with the coffee and refilled Freddy's mug and then Mary's. He looked at Deborah. "You want some, ma'am?" She nodded and handed him the mug, then drank and watched Mary drag half a sausage length through the syrup and devour it. Like the flash of lightning, an image of jamming the fork into Mary's hand zipped across Deborah's mind. She lingered on the idea of holding her down and demanding what she wanted to know. Deborah couldn't let this lead go cold. She took a deep breath, dropped the toughness, and pulled back. "You have to help us. You know in your heart that you do." "Do I?" Mary spat. Dale shot a look across the diner, concerned. Mary's face crumpled into a mess of tangled lines. "The fuck are you looking at, old man?" Freddy held out a hand. "Mary, it's okay." "Fuck you too, then!" Kindness hadn't killed her, so Deborah counted the number of times when pushing had. Her voice rumbled low like bass in a fugue, every word hard and deliberate. "Mary," she oozed, "I know I told you we weren't interested in busting some old whore, but we are interested in solving this case. I'm going to solve it even if I have to break every motherfucker who stands in my way. Right now, you are my only lead, and you're the motherfucker in my way, so you're going to tell me what I want." She leaned in close, relaxed and comfortable in the static crackle of promised violence, and hissed, "Otherwise, if I have to bring you in for sucking cock, I will, and if you happen to resist arrest while I do it, you can bet your tits it's going to be hard to take it doggy style afterwards." Mary's bored expression tightened into knotted rage, but Freddy cut her off before she could speak. "Don't say it," he said. "Don't dare her. She's been doing shit that surprised even me." He drank his coffee and didn't look at her directly. "It's better if you do what she says." Mary shifted like she was going for an escape, but Deborah raised an arm and rested it on the booth, staring her down with a glare that could halt an elephant. The crow's feet around the whore's eyes creased as she squeezed them shut. "All right, Mary said at last. There was a man who liked Lucy a lot. Big guy, built like a steamroller. She thought it was weird that a guy like that would pay for sex, but I've seen Stranger Johns. It's usually the guys you least expect. The big roly-polies with the comb-overs don't have the confidence to pay for it. She drew in a breath like leaves shaking in the wind and inspected the grout between the tile on the wall. He was scary, she said. Deborah suppressed the smile threatening her mouth, but she could have cheered. She thought back to the description of the men who had hit the Fred Meyer, thought about the reports of the men who attacked the strip club. Deborah didn't dare hope that they were connected to her case. She asked, "What made him scary? Because he was big?" Mary's stringy hair flapped around her face again. "No. You do this long enough and you can spot the weirdos. The sadists and the guys who obsess. He wasn't scary because he was big. He was big because he was scary." She let that settle with him and returned to the rest of her meal. The knife scraped against the plate a little harder now. Deborah's stomach clenched into knots and released. Once it settled, she coaxed Mary. "Go on. Tell me more." Mary glanced sidelong at nothing while she chewed, but she continued. "Nothing ever seemed like it was enough. Lucy told me how hung he was once. It hurt. She'd never been with a big guy before, and he'd get furious if she didn't say anything about it. He'd lash out, ask her if she thought he was stupid, and he knew she was laughing about him as soon as he left." She washed down the last of the waffle with some coffee and stared into the black liquid for a while. Finally, she added, "He used to hit her." Deborah did the best she could to conceal her glee. Her stomach had become a butterfly garden. Mary leaned back and looked at the ceiling, her green eyes fluttering around in her skull like she was reading prompts written in the plaster. "The first time, she said his name was Patrick. But then he gave another name, something weird," she muttered. "Some foreign name, even though he was white." Freddy leaned forward and took her hand, holding the fingers and cupping the top of the palm. Softly, he asked, "What was it, Mary? This is important." She stared up a little longer, still remembering, and when she came back to them, she muttered something that Deborah didn't catch. "What was that?" "Bartu," Mary repeated. "He called himself Bartu." After that, Mary was tapped. Freddy tried coaxing more out of her, but she clammed up after the name. Either she wasn't talking anymore, or she really didn't remember anything else, and Deborah genuinely believed it was the latter. The memory of the man she knew as Bartu put barricades up around the rest of Mary's mind, and she wasn't allowed into any of those places. It took a lot of practice to access them as freely as Deborah did. Mary gave them a description. About average height, broad chest and big arms, blonde hair, a massive, unruly beard, small hands. He had small hands, and the memory of that bothered Mary just as much, if not more, than the sum of the man. Freddy put his arm around her and thanked her while he walked her to the car. Deborah paid. Once she was back in the driver's seat, she smiled at Mary and asked if she wanted anything to take home. Mary huffed and stared out the window when she said yes. They stopped at a Wendy's, where Mary ordered a Baconator large fries and a large Coke. She looked sick when they dropped her off at her apartment complex. Freddy didn't say anything to Deborah until she accelerated up the on-ramp on the way back to the station. Whenever he brooded, he was an open book. That had always been something Deborah liked about him, but tonight it irritated her. All of his feelings irritated her. His soft-spokenness bothered her. His patience grated against her nerves. He called to her in the oscillating darkness of the car like he spoke to something delicate, and Deborah bristled. "What's on your mind, Freddy?" Her voice was arctic. "Is everything all right with you?" His tenderness cut her. "Yeah, I'm fine. Everything's fine. Freddy looked out the window and put his fingertips to his chin. That's a lie. How the hell do you know? I'm a cop, Deb. But it doesn't take a cop to figure out something's bothering you. Freddy tried to give her a smile, but it didn't help, so he went back to the window. I've also known you a long time, so that helps. Deborah glared at him. Behind his silhouette, the snow piled up along the sides of the freeway was gray with frozen mud. If you already know, then why did you have to ask then? It just seemed like a better approach. Deborah gripped the steering wheel tighter and twisted her palms back and forth. It's not direct. No, it's not. But it's nicer than just coming out and demanding it. If you hadn't tried to be sneaky about it, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Sneaky? Freddy gave her a look. People usually respond well to niceness. Deborah's mouth formed a hard, tight line as the corners pulled back. She wanted to say something, but she hesitated. Do you remember Hakeem? She asked. Freddy just stared out the window, but his shoulders tensed. They passed a semi on the right, and the blank white of the freight container wiped the reflection of his face from the glass. Yeah, he muttered. We looked for him for months. Gave kids candy, gave people cigarettes, and what did we get, Freddy? He sighed. Deborah gripped the wheel even tighter. What did we get? Nothing. As she clenched her teeth, a pressure built in Deborah's temples. Her mouth hooked into a little snarl. We got worse than nothing. We got false leads. People took advantage of us. People died. It was a bad time. Yeah, it was a bad time until Robles stepped in. Freddy didn't respond. 2 members of their squadron, 2 friends well-intentioned with families back home, were killed in raids staged with bad intel. They were close. Everyone was close in the squad, but Dan Robles was closer to them than Freddy and Deborah. Their deaths struck something deep inside of him. He stopped giving out candy. He stopped giving gifts and offering favors. He started taking. He was court-martialed in the end, but Hakeem was dead. The squad never stopped arguing about it. Freddy shifted in his seat and turned to face ahead. That was a different place, Deborah. In Deborah's veins, a fire ignited. Did you see what that Bartu nutcase did to Lucinda? Did you see what those psychos did to Fred Meyer? You really think it's so different anymore? The tires rolled over the freeway, filling the car with a soft shushing sound. It was broken only by the little ba-bump made when they passed over a seam in the asphalt. The song, whoosh ba-bump, seemed to stretch into eternity. Neither Deborah nor Freddy, comrades and fellows in arms, spoke at all in that little eternity. They sat among the yawning quiet, themselves filled with thought and white sound, neither of them willing to break it. Deborah exited the highway, and her grip on the steering wheel loosened a little. She thought she'd won. I think you should talk to Hartigan, Freddy said when they stopped at a light. Why? You should ask him about getting someone to talk to. If what happened over there is still hitting you this hard... He let Deborah fill in the blanks left unsaid. She wrung the steering wheel, and the pleather groaned beneath her palm. She disengaged from the physical act of driving and let the automatic parts of her take over. Those parts remembered where to go. They remembered the city and what turns to make, knew how to stop and start. They didn't need her. She shifted her attention then to the accusation. When she spoke, her voice wasn't rough. She didn't lash out like she thought she would. There was no tiger in a single one of her words. There was a fast approaching hurricane 50 miles away from shore. It's part of me, Freddy. The way I think, the way I act, all of it is because of what happened over there. And I don't believe that you live without it hanging around your neck, too. We're still at war over here, and I never left the desert. If you did, I wonder if you were ever really there at all. I was there with you, Deb. His words dug their fingers in rougher than Deborah thought they would. She shook her head. You know that's not what I mean. She thought about every back seat Freddy had ever taken, every choice he'd refused to make, and every shot he'd never fired. Deborah had always chalked it up to his compassion, but maybe Freddy had never had it in him to begin with. Do you want to figure this out? It's rough stuff, Deb. We don't have to work it out now. I mean the case. Freddy blinked. Yeah, of course. They arrived at the precinct where Freddy had left his car, and Deborah slowed to a stop in a parking space a few down from it. If you want to solve this case, then why the fuck does it matter how nice we are about it? No matter what we do, that girl is dead, and she's not coming back. It doesn't matter how many smiles we put on people's faces, we're wasting our time when there's real danger. Deborah jacked up the parking brake. Get the fuck out. I'll see you tomorrow.
Johnny, December 11th, 2024.
It was much too early in the morning when Ryan Kennedy got back to Johnny through a burner phone. Sour words tumbled off of Johnny's sleep-heavy tongue. Kennedy took the abuse like a stoic sage. Johnny imagined the cop's morose, basset hound face and wanted to kick him. After Johnny's scolding, Kennedy gave him a few beats of silence and then he broke the bad news about the plates. They were dummies boosted from a 93 Ram registered to George Schick, who was on year 6 of a 13-year sentence at Clallam Bay. The van was a dead end. Johnny hung up and tossed the phone to the foot of the bed, groaning. As he kneaded his forehead, he was tempted to leak the information to the cops just to end the whole fucking thing. But it wasn't meant to end like that. If you wanted the credit, Johnny mused while flossing aggressively, you had to do the work. Johnny wanted the credit. He wanted the credit bad. He wrapped a heavy fleece robe around his body and put on a pair of leather slippers. Armed with coffee, he took a fresh pack of Winston's out to the balcony of his apartment and sat down on the old armchair. He slapped the pack against his wrist a handful of times as he let the blank canvas of snow fill his mind. Now he could think. The van had been his only real lead. Without it, Johnny didn't know where to start. He'd been banking on it, but he should have known better. They were crooks, after all, just like him, and Johnny wouldn't have used a car that could be traced back to him. The coffee needed more cream. It was too bitter to swallow. Johnny topped it off after he finished his cigarette. Back outside, he lit another Winston and watched the smoke dance in the frigid air. Jackie said the guy went by Patrick, and she'd confirmed how big he was. Johnny had a name and a vehicle. It'd be a waste of time to case all the big meathead gyms. Who knew when he went to them, if he went by Patrick there, if he even used a gym? No, there must be a better way to track him down. Johnny lit another cigarette and sipped the coffee. Fuck, it was already getting cold. He left the cigarette in the ashtray and then went back inside to top the mug off with coffee from the pot. He took a sip. Not enough cream. He poured cream until the coffee almost spilled over the top, then leaned down to the counter and sipped it. Johnny nodded to the cup and grunted. That was some good-ass coffee. He picked up the cigarette before he sat down, took a drag, and then took a sip. Going after the man wasn't a good idea. He didn't want to chase after a phantom. Johnny watched a handful of dark birds dart across the white sky, then he traced the black, arterial lines of naked tree branches beside his apartment. Maybe the van wasn't a dead lead. Maybe it needed another angle. If the plates were lifted off a hawked truck, then maybe the van was sold illegally too. Since the kind of men who raid grocery stores and strip clubs like cut-rate Vikings would want a low profile, they wouldn't want to boost their own car or buy one from a dealer. Too much paperwork, too many names. None of that would do. But a chop shop? Johnny killed the Winston and finished his coffee as he looked for the burner phone. He found one in the kitchen drawer underneath a cheese grater. It was early still, but Bobby was the kind of guy who'd answer anyway. The phone rang a few times, and Johnny peered into the fridge for something to eat. "It's Bobby! What's up?" Bobby sounded like he'd become a toad in his sleep. Johnny sniffed the contents of the quarter-full gallon of milk, made a face, and put it back. "Hey," he said, "you still want to help?" There were a few muffled grunts and groans, and Johnny imagined Bobby pushing himself to sit upright in bed. He probably picked up the alarm clock and, peering at the red thin numbers, said to himself, "Fuck me, it's early." Aloud, he only said, "Yeah, I'll meet you at work." Johnny snapped the track phone shut and tossed it on the counter. He got dressed and headed out after he filled a plastic travel mug, muttering to himself about early birds, worms, seizing the day, and all that bullshit. Bobby understood what was expected of him despite the laconic conversation with Johnny. He waited at rolling hills in his Hyundai, staring off into space with a coffee between his hands. Johnny parked next to him and they walked together to the dumpster beside the club. "It's cold, Johnny." "Fuck, you're telling me. What do you need?" Johnny huddled his hands around the coffee and wished he'd brought gloves. In his excitement, he'd only brought his coat. "You still tight with the boys you worked with at the shop?" He dug out his pack of Winstons. Bobby scratched his cheek and eyed Johnny sidelong. "With Eddie?" "Yeah, Eddie." Bobby shrugged. "I guess. How close you mean? I can't get you a car if that's what you're asking." Johnny stopped in the middle of lighting a cigarette to glare at Bobby. "There's nothing wrong with my fucking car." Bobby glanced at the aging Nissan and said nothing about it. Cutting across the sky with a plume of smoke, Johnny asked, "You think they can look into that van we were talking about?" Johnny sipped his coffee and stared at the wall with an uncertain half-frown twisting his mouth. He was significantly less helpful at 7 in the morning. Johnny had always pegged him for an early riser. Bobby said, "You have any idea when they might have gotten it?" "Do I look like their fucking accountant? Of course not." Bobby glanced at Johnny and sighed, settling back into thought. He drank a little more coffee. "I don't think they're gonna know anything, Johnny, but I can ask them." Something about Bobby's way set Johnny's teeth on edge. "Look, tell you what. You tell them I'm coming over and I'll talk to them." Bobby stared at Johnny as if appraising him, which didn't help. After another sigh, he said, "All right, I can do that. Please don't start any shit over there, Johnny. They're nice guys." Johnny waved him away. "When are you gonna make the call?" "Not now. They're not even awake. I shouldn't even be awake. I'll probably call around 10. That's when they usually get into the shop." "How you holding up?" Bobby shrugged. "Feeling a little better. Little better every day, I guess. It's tough, because it could have been me instead of Mike. It's tough thinking I could have been there." "Yeah, well, you weren't, so you're okay." Bobby wavered, but then he nodded. "Yeah. Let me know when you talk to them, yeah?" "Sure, Johnny. Have a good day." "You too, pal." Johnny got to his car first. He glanced over to the dumpster before he took off. Bobby wiped his face like he was trying to get something off, and Johnny rolled his eyes. Bobby was a good guy, and Johnny liked him a lot, and he'd been through some shit, but fuck, he needed to grow some balls and shut the fuck up. He got to the shop around lunchtime, hoping to catch some of the guys when they were between legit car jobs. There was a small flock of them sitting on the hood and roof of a derelict 88 Firebird. It was a corpse, with the empty eyes of shattered windows and bland wounds of fading paint. The mechanics ate sandwiches wrapped in paper to protect from the grime coating their hands. They exchanged jokes in shorthand with half-full mouths. Their words darted past Johnny like glistening beetles of a foreign language, so he stood a little taller and lit a cigarette as he approached, making sure to leave it in his mouth when he addressed them. The man sitting on the roof noticed him first, and he hailed Johnny with a wide wave, a smile and a greeting spoken through ham on rye. Johnny returned the greeting with an inverted nod and a small wave of his own.
We heard you were on your way, Johnny Bean,
Ham on rye said. Johnny shot smoke to the sky. Oh yeah.
Eddie heard and came down too.
Johnny's gaze drifted. He sucked on the cigarette and held the smoke. Ham on rye took a bite and said,
You want I should go get him, Johnny?
I came to talk to you guys. The mechanics exchanged glances. One of the guys on the hood swallowed his bite of turkey on wheat and said, We didn't do nothing, Johnny Bean. Johnny waved away his doubt. I know you didn't, pal. I want some help. All the bundled tension drained out into a smile on Turkey on Wheat's face, but before he could say anything, there came a bright, giant, "Hey!" from the shop. Johnny didn't recognize the man. He was so fat that Johnny didn't think he'd fit underneath a car, and both smile and worry lines creased his face like bulldog folds. He wiped his hands with a dirty rag and extended his arms wide. How the fuck you doing, little Johnny Bean? Holy shit, Johnny muttered. That's Eddie.
Yeah,
Ham on Rye murmured back.
That's what we said too. Motherfucker never comes around.
I didn't even think he could do an oil change, Turkey on Wheat added. Turns out he's pretty good. On the other side of the hood, Beef on White said nothing at all. He sipped his Coke and watched Eddie approach. Johnny stiffened inside Eddie's embrace, hoping the grease didn't stain his shirt or his jacket. Eddie stank like motor oil. How are you? How you been, Johnny Bean? What's the word? Tell me, how are things? He took the rag draped over his shoulder and mopped some of the sweat on his brow. Johnny put his smile on and squeezed Eddie's shoulder. I'm good, Eddie. Things are good. He gestured up and down, the fat man. You look fucking good, Ed. You look like you lost some weight, man. Eddie's laugh had the harsh scrape of a shovel in stony earth.
That's bullshit and even I know it.
With a smile, he slapped Johnny on the arm and pointed with the rag in his finger to the shop.
I got some coffee inside. Put out the smoke and let me pour you a cup, huh?
He held the door open, and Johnny passed through a wall of heat. In Eddie's office, he took off his jacket and hung it on the back of the folding chair in front of the black laminate desk. The coffee smelled good.
How you take it?
Eddie said. Cream, a little sugar.
You like those little creamer packs?
Yeah, Eddie, go ahead and put one in.
You like sweet cream or caramel?
Surprise me. It was too hot to drink right away, but all the heat was good after the outside. Eddie took his styrofoam cup to the big leather swivel chair on the other side of the desk.
What do you need, Johnny?
He sipped his coffee and gave it a grimace, smacking his lips and putting it on the desk.
What'd Kaz send you for?
Nothing, Eddie. I'm here because of the Pope. The big, squishy face furrowed, and the head cocked to the side like a cockatiel trying to get a better look at something it didn't understand.
Since when do you run errands for Mr. Greaves, Johnny Bean?
Johnny peered over the cup's rim, sending a little irritated sigh into the drink before he drank some. That fucking nickname. I'm sure you heard. He's got me looking for the crazies.
The crazies?
Yeah, the guys that fucked up Rolling Hills. All of Eddie's lines puckered in toward his nose.
I didn't hit the place. How the fuck you come in here?
Whoa, 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 whoa. Johnny pushed back into the chair from the force of the explosion. Slow down. Nobody's saying you did anything. Eddie's lines softened a little. He glowered and sipped some coffee. I'm looking for a van.
Bobby said you were looking for a van.
Think you can help me out? Eddie stared at the wall next to the door and stroked his chin. He smacked his lips a couple of times. Johnny waited. At last, Eddie shifted forward in the chair and leaned both arms on the desk. His full focus landed on Johnny.
I don't know. A van we'd probably chop. Not a whole lot of money in vans.
I know for a fact Peaches uses vans for his whores. Drives him around with a mattress in the back. Eddie shrugged.
I don't sell to Peaches. Why the fuck would I sell to my competition, Johnny?
You trying to tell me there's more people looking for cheap parts for a van that nobody drives anymore than people looking for a cheap getaway?
The fuck you trying to say?
Eddie's tone darkened like smoke before a wildfire. I'm saying that fucking Beaumonts have a bad rep for a reason, Eddie. Eddie waved him off and shook his head.
It's all from that movie,
he said, leaning back into his chair. It creaked, and the leather groaned. Which one?
The one with that crazy guy.
What fucking crazy guy?
The one with Hannibal Lecter.
Red Dragon?
The fuck is Red Dragon? No, the one where he pretends like his arm's broken and then clubs the broad with it.
Oh, Silence of the Lambs.
That's the fucking one.
Eddie, you're telling me you haven't sold a single fucking van?
Look, Johnny,
the chair complained again as Eddie heaved himself to the desk.
I don't keep great records of that kind of shit.
He slurped the coffee.
How's Cosmo doing?
Johnny shrugged. Once again, he cursed his luck. He was about as good as square one. Cosmo's all right. He's pissed about what happened to the club. Johnny set the coffee down on the desk and shifted, crossing his ankle over his knee and leaning to the side. Hey, Eddie, you think you can get your guys that case out cars to keep an eye out? With a groan, Eddie heaved himself to standing and adjusted his pants.
Yeah, Johnny, I can ask my guys to keep an eye out. I don't promise nothing, though.
He refilled his coffee and looked at Johnny. Johnny pointed to his cup on the desk and shook his head. The coffee was shit, and the creamer was even more shit. Eddie added,
It's fucked what happened to Rolling Hills. You think it could have been helped?
Johnny grabbed a notepad and pen from Eddie's desk and wrote the Beaumont's plate number on it. By now, he'd committed it to memory. He slapped the pad on the desk and leaned back in the chair. What do you mean? Eddie shrugged and the creases of his face turned down thoughtfully.
I don't know, Johnny. This sort of thing wouldn't have happened when your pop was alive.
Scratching his chin with his thumb, Johnny replied, What, you trying to say something about Cosmo, or are you trying to say something about Mr. Greaves? Eddie raised his hands.
I'm not saying nothing about nobody. I just think times is different is all.
Johnny reflected on that for a minute, but only a minute. He didn't like where the thoughts pushed him, into a place where he felt he didn't belong, where the best of the world had already gone and it was too late to reclaim. Something about the visit to Eddie's had put him in a bad mood and the thoughts didn't help. He pushed them out of his mind and patted Eddie's arm. You keep me posted about the fucking van, alright? He jabbed at the license plate number on the desk a few times. For real. I mean it. This is important.
Sure thing, Johnny,
Eddie shrugged.
You take care of yourself.
On his way out, Johnny couldn't shake the feeling that Eddie would be hard to manage. He didn't feel like he could trust him. What did he mean by that? It wouldn't have happened with your pop around. no, he didn't trust Eddie farther than he could throw him, but he was the best he had to getting to the big guy in his van. In his Nissan, lighting another cigarette, Johnny just prayed it worked.
Temujin, December 11th, 2024.
Temujin had transformed the main office of the clan's derelict building into a master's suite. He'd rummaged a tall mirror from a dumpster and stared at his bifurcated reflection in the cracked surface. His eyes were so weary. From the inner corner of each, down along the edges of his nose, flared twin creases. He could not figure out how they'd come to be. Temujin was relatively young, and he was in the best physical condition of his entire life, yet he still buckled under the weight of exhaustion every night when he retired from the other men. Still, physical fatigue was much preferable to the spiritual weariness he experienced before he had become Temujin. His thoughts shifted to Bartu. The clan captain grew more restless every day. There were demons inside of him Temujin hadn't seen nor anticipated all those years before. Bartu had changed. Temujin understood his right hand less and less every day. He would have to do something about him soon. The thought broke his heart, and so he decided that, in order to be the leader his clan needed, he would need to kill that sentimental part of him too. There were so many parts of him from the old way that still needed cutting out. Temujin gazed into his eyes a little longer and then heaved a sigh. He crouched down low to the floor and lifted a floorboard at the base of the mirror, extracting an orange pill bottle. Temujin held the bottle up, careful not to let the pills rattle against the plastic. He was desperately low. He squeezed his eyes shut and sighed, thinking. The last pharmacy they'd raided hadn't had any Kepra. Temujin had shot the babbling, weeping pharmacist in the head while she tried to explain. The words were meaningless to Temujin. There were only two things of value that she could possibly offer him, and without the pills, Temujin was uninterested in the other. They would need to go out for another raid soon. It should be easy to talk the men into it. They were restless and fighting amongst each other. Raids kept them happy. Temujin entered the adjoining bathroom and opened the orange bottle, but as soon as the cap clicked off, a wave of sickly sensation crawled from his brain and into his gut. He didn't notice it at first as he counted the pills. He'd lived with it for so long that sometimes he didn't realize it was happening, despite how important it was. The sense of distance grew in the back of his throat, pulling his mind out of his body until it were as if he were observing himself fingering through the little pile of pills. A sense of rottenness slid from his throat down his spinal column, like nostalgia spoiled from being left out in the sun. The sight went out of his eyes, and the feeling went out of his hands, and his lips went numb too. Temujin only knew what happened after that by piecing together the scene when he came back. His hands were empty, and urine puddled at his feet. It had been 2 months since his last instance of lost time, and he'd hoped the Kepra was the magic bullet he'd been searching for, but now those pills were scattered in the basin of the sink, pale little half-gram oblongs of stability. Temujin's thoughts slowed, slipping on the gray slurry of epileptic weariness, and he stared into the sink for something. Vaguely, he was aware that he saw fewer pills than he should, but he was too confused from the seizure to make out why. Temujin squinted and tried counting. There were fewer. The significance took some time to register, but when it did, his eyes shot open wide and the muscles in his jaw knotted tight. He didn't have enough. He needed to take the Keppra twice a day. He needed 4 pills for each dose. There were only 6 in the sink. He didn't have enough. If the seizures were returning and Temujin missed his dose, he ran the risk of a heavier wave knocking him over later. Worst of all, he ran the risk of it happening before his men. Temujin needed his pills. He needed to control himself. As if carried by the tides of his unconscious fear, he dressed himself without awareness, loaded the gun without attention, and appeared at the bottom of the stairs after a mechanical descent. Quiet alarm moved Temujin's body until he came to the large space with the men drinking beer on the floor, talking and playing cards, some sparring or smoking.
"Prepare yourselves,"
Temujin roared. The thunderclap startled the men who had not already noticed him filling the broad threshold, arms outstretched, palms spread wide, and face darkened with martial hatred. Those who were not in the common room rushed to find their way, and every man in the rundown warehouse organized themselves into rows, head behind head before Temujin. He barked,
"We raid again tonight, men!"
The static of uncertain murmurs crackled between the tongues of the men, and the frigid formation of their lines wavered as they exchanged looks with one another. Temujin roared for silence, and he had it. The lines were once again crisp and sharp, all eyes back on him. He cast his gaze over the few dozen faces in various stages of beardedness, searching for his man. The air in the room was still and stagnant with bated breath as the men watched. Temujin's low voice was heavy with cold, quiet rage when he asked, "Where is Bartu?" No answer came. No man carried the courage to speculate. Temujin's jaw furled. The creases in his brow deepened and his knuckles went white. He had the strength and presence to hold his mouth in the same hard line, though he was certain his fury was evident. He turned his face and pointed a finger at Sukhothai. "You. Find a van. Find a truck. Bring something here to carry a party of raiders." Temujin returned his gaze to the crowd and twisted his lips while he thought. The raid would need to be fast. He needed men he trusted. He needed men who would be vicious and would not ask questions. Raids were close to sacred among them and were not carried out with such spontaneity. Each assault was the result of careful planning and solemn ritual. Temujin needed men who were steeped in his dogma as much as they were their own bloodlust. "Kopek, Kudu," he called, pointing to each man as he said their name. 2 shiny shaved scalps, the mark of Temujin's lieutenants, hustled to the front of the room and stood at attention before their Khan. As he addressed them, his voice lowered. "You 2 will come with me. Each of you will pick 3 men." Kopek nodded, snapped a salute, and then picked 3 men by shooting a glare at them. They joined them at the front, and then Kopek led the way to the lockers near the front that served as the clan's armory. Kudu hesitated. The delay was not lost on Temujin. With a deepening glare, he growled, "Do you need help selecting, Kudu?" The lieutenant's eyes lingered over his master, and Temujin could not quite decipher what they held. Kudu asked, "Is everything all right, sir?" Temujin pointed at the lines of men. "Choose." Kudu grit his teeth and nodded. He pointed to 3 men and led them to the armory as Kopek had. Temujin straightened and thought about Kudu, but allowed this distraction only for a moment. He shifted his attention to the remaining man with a shaved head.
Erkatu,
He beckoned. His man approached.
you are in charge while we raid.
He pointed to the mass of men standing head behind head before them.
Drill them. See to it that they are ready for our return.
In response, Erkatu saluted, spun an about-face on his heels, and hollered orders. He was received with simultaneous grunts of acknowledgement, the stomping of feet in unison, and their organized scattering. Temujin, Kopek, and Kudu went with their men into the snow at the front of the warehouse to meet Sukhothai. He had stolen a black F-150, and the lieutenants climbed into the cab. The others climbed into the bed. Sukhothai backed out of the driveway and made his way out of the desolate industrial park. Temujin sat on the floor that the front passenger seat once occupied, and Sukhothai sensed something was amiss. Dissonance lingered in the air the way that old smoke does, detectable through its shadow's remaining stain, and so Sukhothai did not look at his Khan when he asked, "Where are we going, sir?"
Bartu, December 11th, 2024.
The snow in the parking lot was ugly. It was pockmarked with holes from dripping icicles and slashed with scabbing tire treads. The hard, crunchy ice barked with every one of Bartu's heavy footsteps. The sound filled his ears, filled his whole head, and he was certain that the entire neighborhood heard him and that they were watching him now, peering through gaps in the still curtains which sealed in the light of the apartments overlooking the crowded lot. When he stepped up onto the curb, he stopped and traced the dotted line of windows up the length of the tall building. His heart shot into his throat, where it throbbed. The saliva in his mouth stuck to his lips and gums like hot porridge. Bartu didn't feel well. Now that they had begun the process of Fajan on the new woman, the old sickness was taking over. The process of breaking them, it was too close to what the old sickness needed. Bartu had controlled it. Temujin and the clan were supposed to help manage it, but the space between needs grew narrower and narrower with every manifestation. The last two girls, Molly and Candace, had him slipping. Bartu relapsed again. He'd taken the old black van and come to the apartment building unannounced. He needed someone to talk to, someone who would hold him and stroke his head and listen. In his pocket, rolled up and held together with a rubber band, was his cut from the pills they boosted 2 raids ago. Bartu was going to go to her apartment and give her the money, and she'd give him what he wanted, what he needed. A car hissed through the slush on the street behind him. The night was so quiet. He heaved a sigh and dropped his eyes to the double doors before him, gazing through the empty plate glass and into the half-lit apartment lobby. He pushed the door open and took the stairs to the 3rd floor. The hallway was quiet, too. The carpet absorbed the sound of his footsteps, but he caught snatches of activity as he passed each apartment. Behind one door, Clint Eastwood asked the punk if he felt lucky. A couple fought as he passed another. Across the hall, another pair passionately made up. Everything was muted and muffled, as if wrapped in a pillow. The whole complex was wrapped in a pillow, like someone trying to suffocate it. He stopped at the little round placard that read 319. He couldn't quite decipher the sounds behind it. It might have been weeping, it could have been screaming, it could have been something else entirely. He swallowed down a lump in his throat. His hands shook, but he forced them to obey. He raised them to the door and knocked. Nothing. Only the sounds, but less ambiguous. He knocked again. The sounds stopped, replaced by irritated cussing. Bartu shifted his weight from one foot to the other and waited and listened. The moaning resumed. Bartu snarled at the door and knocked again, this time harder, pounding on it. The moaning stopped and the cussing returned, followed by the shuffling and pounding of furious feet. The door to apartment 319 swung open to reveal the glare of an aged man with almost no hair on his head and bulldog-like jowls. He was totally naked except for the gold chain hanging from his neck and the heavy jewel on his finger held with a wide gold band. His partially engorged cock glistened with wet sheen. "Who the fuck are you?" he growled at Bartu. "And what the fuck do you want?" "I came to see Jackie," Bartu replied. "Well, in case you didn't hear out here, she's fucking busy, pal, so get lost." Bartu shook his head. He ignored the deepening fury blossoming across the old man's face. Bartu pushed him aside and stepped into the apartment. "Jackie, where are you?" When the whore came into the living room, she was tying red silk robe around her slight waist. Her feet were so small, and her skin was unbelievably pale. She froze when she met Bartu's eyes. "Patrick?" Bartu's jaw tensed. Jackie leaned her head forward and furrowed her brow. "How the fuck did you find my apartment?" "I need to talk." Jackie shook her head. "Look, Patrick, you gotta go. I'm busy. Come find me at the club later or something, but don't ever come back here, all right?" The man who opened the door slapped a hand on Bartu's shoulder and jerked him around. "Look, cocksucker, you heard the lady. If you know what's good for you, you'll make like a banana and get the fuck out of here!" Bartu maintained a flat, dispassionate affect when he swung at the old man's cheekbone. The old man staggered back a few steps. He put a hand to the wound, partially covering an expression that said this sort of thing had happened to him before, but so long ago that now it felt like déjà vu. Jackie shrieked, but Bartu shot her a glare that made her sink to the floor, covering her mouth. Her eyes got big and bright with the attentive light of fear. Bartu grabbed a lamp and broke it against the old man's jaw on the same side he'd sent the punch. The lamp was hollow pottery and exploded on impact with a beautiful sound like a kettle drum. Jackie scampered backwards, still sitting and pushing herself with the heels of her feet, using the part of her silk robe under her ass to slide on the hard tile kitchen floor. She made panicked sounds that could have belonged to a bird, like she was hyperventilating and shrieking and trying to stay quiet all at the same time. She wasn't wearing any panties, and Bartu stood still, hunched over the groaning old man while he eyed her exposed flesh until she disappeared behind the kitchen island. Bartu didn't want to have sex with Jackie anymore. He kicked the old man's face until he was sure the old man was knocked out, if not dead, and then stood erect. Jackie whimpered as he approached, then scrambled to her feet and pulled the biggest knife out of the wooden block beside the sink, toppling the block and all the other knives in the process. They clattered to the floor and Jackie's whimpering evolved into furious gasps. From the ashes of terror clutching her eyes rose a firebird born of hatred and confusion. Her cheeks flushed and the bruise darkened, and she let loose a chilling war cry pulled from a hell inside her throat. Bartu grabbed a heavy stone ashtray and flung it at her. Jackie dodged, and the ashtray whizzed close enough to her head that the force of air disturbed tendrils of her hair as it passed. The sound it made when it shattered against the wall was not musical. Jackie made the mistake of glancing back at it, shocked and shaking, and that fraction of time was enough for Bartu. He grabbed her wrists and twisted them, and she dropped the knife with a pained shout. Bartu first meant to punch her chin, to make her teeth clack and crack, but his vision and his thoughts were so distorted by the hazy red rage drifting over them that he missed and got her trachea. The blow was solid, and some of the cartilage made a loud crack when it buckled under his fist. It ended up being a good thing. It silenced her sounds. Bartu beat her while he held her wrists, and even though he hit her with his offhand, the beating was still vicious. Then he let her go and picked up the knife and stabbed her. Bartu lost count of how many times the knife plunged into her, and after a while, he lost track of time, too. It was the groan of the old man in the living room that brought Bartu to himself. Bartu reached for the granite counter with slippery red hands, struggling to pull himself up. His boots tracked sticky red prints over the tile floor and then on the carpet. The old man flopped onto his stomach and struggled to stand, but Bartu kicked him back down before he could make much progress. The knife worked the old man's flesh with patternless rage, sometimes sweeping quickly across it with thin, shallow cuts, then sometimes, with slow precision, it would take aim and dive into the meat in a fatal place. Bartu no longer had control. The knife directed his hand. It was not the other way. When he returned to himself, he was in Jackie's shower. He watched pink water circle down the drain. There were bits of flesh in his hair and under his nails. The blood was hard to remove. He cleaned himself as best as he could, and when he was drying himself, the panic set in. What happened? What had he done? Bartu's mind raced. His panic deepened, and he studied himself in the mirror. When he'd done this before, there was always a plan. It was always late at night with weeks of preparation, never done at an apartment, and there was only ever one body to remove. His knuckles creaked as he gripped the edge of the bathroom counter. Bartu closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened them again, he chose calm. As Temujin taught, he would subdue the world and force it to obey. It was later in the evening, but it was not so late that he could maneuver the complex with certainty of being unseen. His clothes were still bloody, and there was nothing in Jackie's closets that could fit. He took the comforter from the bed and rolled the body up in it while weighing which of his two options, wearing the bloody clothes or continuing in the winter night naked, would attract more attention. He decided to wear the clothes and hope no one saw him. He tied the ends of the comforter with scarves, grateful that the blanket was both black and thick, as it was already soaked with blood. He couldn't carry the body down. The risk of being seen was too great. Bartu's mind raced with options, mundane, practical, and ridiculous. Chopping up the bodies had worked before, but he hadn't prepared to dismember her here. His axe was in the van. He could take the whore to the river and do it there, throw the pieces in and let the bass and steelheads pick them apart. The problem of getting the corpse to the van was still unresolved. Panic crept back into Bartu's heart, and when he looked at the disaster he'd created in the apartment, not to mention the other body he'd nearly forgotten about, Bartu crouched down to sit on the balls of his feet and covered his face with his hands. He closed his eyes and took deep breaths. He could travel faster without the body. Was there a way to make the body travel faster without him? Bartu opened his eyes, stood up, and scanned the apartment. His gaze landed on the balcony and stopped. Jackie seemed heavier in death than in life. Bartu hauled her corpse wrapped in the blanket over the railing of the balcony and pushed it off. It made a curt, muffled slap when it landed on the sidewalk. Even though it was wrapped in the blanket, some of the blood still splattered onto the ice. Bartu ran faster than he ever had in his entire life. The long, quiet hallway went by in a blur of color and muffled noise. He went down the small stairwell, taking 2, sometimes 3 steps at a time. He left the old man. He would come for him after the whore's body was in the van. Outside, he scooped the body up and hefted it over his shoulder and ran across the ice, sliding and slipping and almost falling the entire way to the van. When he opened the back, he heard laughter. In the distance, a group of what appeared to be college students walked up to the complex. Bartu couldn't tell if they were watching him. Had they seen him the whole time? Could they see the stains on his shirt? They were far away, but what if they came closer? Bartu grit his teeth together and thought hard as he put the body in the back. One of the young men stopped and hailed him with a wave. Bartu looked at him with a tight, wide-eyed expression, grateful that they were too far away to make it out. "You okay?" the kid called. Bartu nodded and stammered. Yes. "You sure?" the kid called again. "You okay to drive, mister?"
Yeah. Yeah, I'm fine. It's just been a long day, that's all. Thanks for asking."
The other kids already had the lobby's plate glass doors opened, and they beckoned their friend to join them. He glanced at them and then back to Bartu, and after a little hesitation, he flashed Bartu a peace sign and walked toward the apartment. Bartu's hands quaked. He steadied himself with the Chevy and stared at the soaked lump laying before him. The van stank of blood. He looked at the apartment building, then up to the balcony where he dropped the whore, and Bartu knew he couldn't go back. He had to leave the old man. As if to reaffirm the thought, the long, shrill whine of a siren came from the distance. He knew it had to be coming for him. It had to know what he'd done. That was all the thinking he needed to do. Bartu slammed the doors to the back of the van and sped off toward the river. It was such a cold night, and the air coming off the riverbank was even colder. The breeze sliced across Bartu's skin as sharp as razor blades as he surveyed the banks in search of a place to complete his work. The hard-packed snow and ice was everywhere. The frigid weather kept visitors from the riverside walking path, so the snow here was exceptionally white. It glowed in the soft glare of moonlight. Blood would be impossible to overlook here. Already, Bartu had left too much behind. The van's tire tracks were among a small collection streaking the lot here, and he left footprints while lost in his dazed search. No, he thought. He couldn't finish things here, but he couldn't move the corpse again either. Too much moving. Too much risk. Panic traced its fingers down his spine. Bartu shivered. He insisted it was just the cold. The body was stiffer now than it had been before the drop. The blood smeared across the whore's blank, dumb, beautiful face. Bartu shot anxious looks around the park. There was nobody. There was nobody to see him. He was safe. Do it. The axe blade bit through the flesh and into the stump beneath the whore's body. It swung through the air 4 times for the limbs, and then a 5th time for the head, which became a 6th because his hand slipped and he missed. He split the limbs apart again at their joints and searched the sky for clouds and hoped that snow was on its way to cover the red stains bespeckling the ugly snow. Bartu had only hope now. The torso went into the river first, wrapped in the dark comforter, making a deep, full sound when it fell.
Bartu raised the whore's head by the hair and swung it around and around, imagining the fabled David in his sling. He let go of the hair and the head soared over the river, trailing blood that made Bartu cringe. It made a loud splash too, but the sound was muted by the distance. It was tiny and meek. The limbs flew into the river afterwards. Their sounds were smaller, hardly noticeable against the river's steady shushing. In his chest, Bartu's heart pounded with a mounting insanity. It was done. They would not find her. He heaved a sigh and a wave of calm washed over him. It was done. The moonlight glittered in fractured scales over the living river, and Bartu saw in his mind the creatures living in its frigid belly, already swarming around the pale whore flesh, already nibbling at it, already saving him. Bartu closed his eyes and sighed again and knew that he would be all right. It was good to feel safe. He washed his hands and arms in the river. The blood stains lingered on his skin, but he couldn't see it well in the wan light of the white moon. Bartu drove back to Temujin's warehouse, his home, with the false sense that things had been righted in the world. The darkness which had long consumed him dug its hungry roots deeper into the parts of him that he'd never known existed. Killing the whore gave the darkness the power to burrow into places so essential that Bartu did not know them. So firmly secured was the sickness, so smug that it whispered simple lies. This was the last time. He was free. Never again would he have to battle with the demon of his compulsion. But in truth, it sucked on the spiritual marrow of its most recent victory, already fantasizing about the next.
Temujin, December 11th, 2024.
Since the last major raid, the police put an armed officer in front of every single major retailer. It was a paltry gesture, a security blanket to keep the pathetic plebs spending their money. Temujin had listened to the police chief, an old man named Hardigan with a raspy voice, talk about how well trained the officers were and how everyone was safe. There was no safety anymore. The world must be prepared to take or be taken. The eager murderers tore through the target, and for all their military posturing when the men were let loose, they disseminated into little more than vicious, chaotic thieves. Their gun muzzles flashed and barked while bullets tore through animate and inanimate alike. Their lead did not discriminate. Like a flood, they spread through the store, their violence summoning screams. There was no man with the sword this time. There was no ceremony nor purpose. There was only noise. Temujin allowed his men the pleasure of disaster. It was a useful distraction. He broke off from the others to go to the pharmacy on the other side of the store from where the chaos festered. Before the counter stood a few people searching the air as if looking for the sounds drifting through it. They didn't move from their place in line. Temujin shot each of them with his pistol and hurtled over the counter. The pharmacist seemed too confused to respond immediately. He gaped at what only moments before had been his clientele, now merely moaning bodies bleeding out on the gleaming linoleum. Temujin grabbed his shirt and pulled him close, jamming the pistol into his stomach.
Kepra, he snarled. I want all of it.
The pharmacist's head tittered left and right.
Temujin saw in his dark eyes a desire to find reason. Temujin shook him and repeated his command, this time louder.
I want all of your seizure medicine. Keppra, lamotrigine, Vimpat, whatever you have.
Eyes wild with frantic confusion, the pharmacist stammered. We don't carry Vicodin here. No opiates. No opiates. Temujin pointed the gun at the wall behind the pharmacist, keeping the barrel close to his ears, and fired 2 shots. The gunfire seemed to jostle him back to the present moment. Comprehension returned as the pupils focused, and Temujin jabbed the pistol back into his gut. He shook the pharmacist again and said,
This is the last time I'll say it. Anti-seizure drugs. Give them to me.
The pharmacist nodded. With his free hand, Temujin grabbed the pharmacist's shoulder and spun him around. The gun jabbed into his spine. When he got to the shelf, the pills shook in their blister packs and the man collected them with trembling hands. After he grabbed a few, he hesitated. He stammered, What dose do you need? Temujin snatched the blister pack out of his hands and dumped them into his bag.
It doesn't matter. I need all of them.
These don't resell on the street. There's no reason to steal seizure medication. Already, Temujin's men had begun collecting around the entrance. Despite the bedlam in their execution, raids lasted 15 minutes. No more. Every warrior in the clan knew that. Temujin shot the pharmacist in the back and then the head and stuffed his backpack and pockets with whatever he could get his hands on, hoping at least some of it was what he needed. Once assembled, the raiders burst into the parking lot, some brandishing their guns and firing at anyone who dared cross their paths, while others pushed shopping carts loaded with the spoils of their assault. Every one of them laughed or whooped or roared with the cheers of victory. Sukhothai waited in the truck for them, peering anxiously out the window. He hadn't moved from the loading zone from which he dropped the men off. They loaded their spoils into the truck and then got in themselves. Sukhothai drove away. Stolen beers were passed around and the men cracked them open and toasted. Temujin, however, declined. His hand rested on one of the blister packs in his pocket. He was anxious to take his pills. They arrived at the house and unloaded the goods close to the armory. Their brothers who'd stayed received them with smiles and hearty slaps on the back. They sorted the goods into 2 piles. One contained necessities to be distributed amongst the men, and the other was to be sold to raise funds. When Temujin passed the threshold into the house, his clansmen cheered for him and chanted his name. Graciously, but impatiently, he accepted their praise, grasping hands and grinning while he put the random pills on a pile to sell. In the bathroom, after he'd celebrated a convincing amount of time, he popped open the blister packs into the bottles he hid beneath the floorboards. He took his evening dose and closed his eyes. Temujin took a deep breath in and then let a long breath out. For a long time, he sat on the bathroom floor like that. Then he leaned his head backward and spread himself over the cool tile. The load was lighter now. He could breathe again. But he still carried burdens. As he lay naked on the bathroom floor, drifting off on the raft of sleep despite the roar of celebration below, he still did not know where Bartu was.
Bartu, December 11th, 2024.
Enough is enough, Bartu thought. He gripped the steering wheel as tightly as he could, but his hands wouldn't stop shaking. He was cold with encroaching madness. He was consumed with his stupidity. How could he be so impulsive? How could he allow himself to make such a ridiculous mistake? A chain of mistakes, each folding so perfectly into the other that it may as well have been a line of dominoes arranged into a downward spiral. The sickness that clutched his throat and guts and cerebellum in the parking lot of Jackie's apartment was no closer to releasing its toxic hold. His saliva still had the thick consistency of rubber cement, and his head could have been dunked in napalm. What was happening? Was he in control? Bartu couldn't tell anymore. All he knew was that he needed help. Help would come from Temujin. When he caught sight of the warehouse, relief flooded him as if a dark levee had burst inside his heart. It was not until he was nearly upon the driveway that he recognized something amiss. Bartu stopped the van and squinted at the driveway, trying to determine what was wrong. Realization shot through him like a thunderbolt. There was a truck. Where the van was meant to be, there was a large, black truck. How long had he been gone? Had the clan already replaced him? They'd already replaced the van. The sense that Bartu was losing his hold on the world grew more formidable with every heartbeat until it practically became a living creature, hanging from the curve of his aortic arch, constructing a nest with the sticks of his paranoia and the twigs of his doubt. He might have stayed there in the driver's seat of the van for the rest of the night, pondering what was and was not, were it not for two of his brothers freshly emerged from the festivities inside the house, taking irregular, unsteady steps through the snow, stupid grins on their faces while they chugged stolen beer. They came to the van and knocked on the window, startling Bartu, who was too engrossed in his thoughts to see the pair approach. He rolled the crank on the door and his window lowered. "Brothers! What can I do for you?" Each of the men gave the other a solemn glance. "Sovereign's been looking for you, Brother Bartu," one of them said. Apprehensive tension laced his voice, which was pitched low with disappointment. Bartu frowned, his brow creasing with concern. "Why? What's wrong? Is the Sovereign all right?" The one who hadn't spoken, whom Bartu recognized as sane, nodded grimly. "He's all right, brother." Sane gave his companion another look, but the brother fixed his eyes on the ice beneath the van's tires. Sane returned his attention to Temujin's lieutenant. "Where have you been, brother?" Bartu's eyes flared. "I was out for Sovereign! He sent me for reconnaissance. How dare you question a lieutenant?" The other one, whom Bartu did not recognize, raised his head. "No, Bartu, you weren't." The steering wheel's leather creaked as Bartu twisted his grip. He opened his mouth to repeat the question, but the brother cut him off. "Sovereign's been looking for you. We were sent out here to get rid of the truck, but you should come with us first." Sane grunted in solidarity. He said, "Sovereign said Kudu needs to speak with you the moment you get back." Albeit still enraged, Bartu relaxed a little. Kudu was of the same mind as Bartu. Nodding, he released his hold on the steering wheel and raised his hands in submission. "Very well. Take me to Brother Kudu." Sane gave the other man a glance, but it went unacknowledged. The brother focused his attention on the lieutenant in the car, his face creased with lines of distrust. He opened the van door, staying behind it as if it were a shield. Bartu slid out of the van, casting a look to the house and the noise inside it. "Why are we celebrating, brothers?" "There was a raid.
said the unknown brother. Sane inspected the ground between his feet and grimaced, then looked at Bartu uneasily. The unknown brother added, "If you'd been out for Sovereign, you would have known that for sure." Bartu kept his gaze on the other steady as he walked around the open door. "What's your name, brother?" "Dua." As the man said it, he straightened a little, as if the word gave him strength. Dua's voice was stern, fearless, stoic. It spoke to administer fact. Bartu stood close to him, his right shoulder almost pressed against the front of Dua's own. The clan lieutenant leaned his head closer to Dua, but stared past the man's ear. He refused to look at him directly. "Dua, don't delude yourself into thinking that you understand the Sovereign." From Dua, something intangible rippled, almost like a growl without sound, or a shudder so fierce that it shook the air around him, and Bartu felt it and smelled the challenge before the conceited, self-important little upstart had the chance to deliver it. Bartu dug his fingers into Dua's shirt and pulled him close, snarling in his ear. "Don't delude yourself into thinking you understand any of this." He thrust Dua back, who slipped on the ice and almost recovered. The fall wasn't hard, and the bruises would heal quickly if they even emerged at all, but the pride was another matter. Sane even looked away from his brother, ashamed for him. Bartu spat on the ground and then said, "Remember your place. Get rid of the truck like you were told." Then he beckoned to Sane. "Take me to Kudu." The clan's celebration wasn't hindered by the appearance of Brother Bartu. In fact, they didn't seem to notice his arrival at all, so deep were they in their food, drink, and revelry. In the common area, some of the men wrestled or boxed while others sat in a circle and played card games, a pile of looted goods stacked at the center instead of colored chips. Some sang, a few played instruments. All of them were loud. Bartu and Sane walked past the basement door, wide and open like a screaming mouth. The sounds of the taken women rose from the long, dark throat of the staircase like snarling, dark tentacles, some of pleasure, some of pain, most of terror, and very few patched from all these things together. Although Sane walked in front, he did not lead Bartu. Sane wouldn't dare. They ascended the creaking staircase to the lieutenant's quarters, and the young man stopped at the second door. He made space for Bartu, averting his eyes from the lieutenant, his hands folded in quiet, respectful deference. From the other side of the door came grunts and moans, and Bartu thought about Jackie, and he thought about the old man he'd killed, and a wave rushed over him like the stench of memory left to rot. Bartu knocked on the door, but the sounds didn't stop. Rage made him dizzy. He knocked again. This time, the sounds stopped. The door opened, and enormous Kudu stood naked in the frame. "Brother Bartu," he said. "Brother Kudu." Kudu's great shaved head with its enormous brown beard turned to Sane and said, "You may go, little brother. Enjoy the night." Sane nodded back, again with deference. Sane was always so deferential. Kudu gave him a huge smile, and it followed him like a spotlight as he walked down the hall and vanished down the stairs. Once gone, the smile evaporated, leaving a dry, craggy grimace in its place. "Come in." The room was dominated by a king-sized mattress at its center, unsupported by a bed frame and covered with shiny red sheets. A woman lay on her back, spread across the sheets, her hair dark and damp, and skin glistening with the sheen of sweat.
Her eyes were closed, her breasts heaving with her breathing, and her lips hung half open as if in the middle of forming a word she'd already forgotten. Kudu closed the door and returned to the bed. The woman purred, rolling onto her stomach, crawling to him, planting kisses along his thighs and crotch. Kudu did not acknowledge her except to put a hand on the back of her head.
Where were you, Bartu?
What happened? Bartu asked. Why was there a raid? I hadn't heard anything about it, had you? Kudu shook his head.
No, it surprised all of us. Kopek and I led it. Sovereign went off on his own. Sukhothai stole the truck.
The woman slipped his erection into her mouth and he closed his eyes and uttered a low, satisfied groan. Kudu stroked her hair and back. When he opened his eyes, they locked onto Bartu's and he said,
Sovereign's furious. Where is he? In his room. He brought one of the girls with him, but I haven't heard anything. I'm sure he's sleeping.
Bartu stroked his beard. That sort of ploy was more and more common of Temujin with every passing day.
What does he suspect?
Kudu didn't answer. He ran his fingers through the woman's hair and closed his eyes again. His head hung back off of his shoulders and he groaned. He repeated his first question.
Where were you, brother?
Even though Kudu's eyes were closed, Bartu dropped his gaze away from his beloved brother, as if the weight of the contact was too much to hold. His eyes slipped down the line of the woman's back and up the curve of her ass as he thought about Jackie and swallowed. The woman took Kudu's cock out of her mouth and stroked it. She kissed it and rubbed his leg with her other hand. Kudu opened his eyes and glared, clearly impatient for his answer. Bartu replied,
You know where I was.
Shaking his head, Kudu pushed the woman off of him and rose.
You're pathetic. You have no control over yourself. You're weak.
The words stung more than Bartu thought they could. Indeed, they hurt him more than he thought words could ever hurt him again. He thought that Temujin had trained him well enough, hardened him, trimmed away, and then killed the parts of him that could be hurt, but that was another lie. It was another fiction told by Temujin.
I need help, brother. You need to get a grip!
Kudu raised his arms to the side and shook his head again.
How are we supposed to replace Sovereign if you're not even strong enough to resist your impulses? How are we supposed to control the clan if you can't even control yourself?
Kudu kneaded his forehead and then wiped his face with an open palm. Behind him, the woman on the bed eyed his calves hungrily. Bartu noticed her eyes looked strange. Her pupils were so enlarged that the light brown irises seemed more like a lining. Bartu wondered what thoughts floated through her head, and whether they drifted aimlessly like jetsam or with the precise hunger of a shark, or somewhere between the two. Perhaps the automated mind of a goldfish. He was aware suddenly that Kudu was still reprimanding him, that he was still spewing phonemes and making gestures of controlled disappointment, and Bartu didn't have the focus to hear any of them until his brother said,
It's clear that I need to take control after the coup.
As if in a dream, Bartu's gaze swam to meet Kudu's, and he opened his mouth and spoke at last.
What?
He asked.
I said that when we overthrow Temujin, it's obvious that we can't share power. You're not ready.
Kudu's grimace couldn't hide completely the opportunistic glee glittering at the corner of his eyes.
You'll still be my chief lieutenant, though. Obviously.
The woman on the bed fingered tufts of carpet with her long nails. She closed her eyes and rolled onto her back,
limbs spread wide. Bartu's thoughts went back to Jackie and the old man that had been with her. He felt the heat of the blood on his knuckles, tasted the iron it cast into the air, heard the flat, wet splat of the corpse when it hit the snow. Kudu's mouth produced sounds and made shapes, but it didn't communicate anything. He shook his head again, like an angry father, and pointed at the door. Before Bartu could respond, Kudu turned his back on him and lay beside the woman. He rubbed his palm over the close-cropped fur on her scalp as her lips and tongue and fingers crawled over his flesh. Bartu left Kudu's room, stunned, wounded, and enraged. Downstairs, the men were still in the clutches of their celebration, too distracted to notice or perhaps to comprehend Bartu's presence. Somehow he arrived at the mouth of the basement, though he didn't remember how. Every step groaned as he descended them, and the sounds of women and the sounds of men grew sharper with each of them. At the bottom, Bartu stared across at the empty cages that should have been filled with lieutenants' wives. They looked so strange without occupants staring through the bars, like jack-o'-lanterns without candles inside. They must be upstairs, serving the same function as the one with Kudu. The sounds came from the main cage room, and Bartu opened the door. Mattresses, blankets, and pillows were spread across the rough gray floor, and atop them writhed naked flesh. Bartu searched the limbs and the expressions for the face of the woman he'd taken from the strip club during the raid that he had organized. By that right, reasoned Bartu, she was his. He'd come to the basement thinking that maybe she could be the new Jackie, that he could rebuild the connection he'd had with her with a new one, but once he caught sight of her twisted, agonized face, he saw too that she was already occupied. Sukhothai, unworthy, sycophantic, baby-faced Sukhothai had already taken her. Bartu didn't understand. Of all the women, of all the men, of all the choices, of all the combinations, why did this one come? It was impossible, wasn't it, that it could be a coincidence? Already wounded by his brother, Bartu now suffered humiliation from this worm. The hatred, stirred on by the indomitable hurt that Temujin had promised to take from him, rose from his guts to scale his ribs, stomping on his heart as it forced its way into his throat, charging through until it emerged from his mouth, transmuted into sound. Bartu screamed. The entire room stopped, though not all at once. It rippled through the bodies like scattered raindrops, but within seconds, indeed, by the time Bartu was already upon Sukhothai, everyone was too stunned to react. By his hair, Bartu dragged the worm out of the woman. His woman, goddammit, and across the pillows and over the confused, watching bodies that lay in the way of the door. Once his feet padded over the cold concrete of the next room, Bartu unleashed his hatred. It did not take much effort for Sukhothai's skull to break. His face caved like an overripe melon that had a hammer taken to it. Despite what Kudu said, Bartu was strong. Within the first 3 or 4 times that Bartu slammed the worm's face into the floor, he was probably already dead, but Bartu didn't stop. It was not enough to kill Sukhothai. He needed to destroy him utterly. The young, handsome face was gone, and that was a good start, but Bartu wanted to tear the meat off the bones and eat every morsel just so he could shit it out. He wanted to... Hands pulled Bartu off of the new man. He'd lost track of time again, so consumed was he in Sukkotai's defilement. The only indicator he had to mark any sort of passing was the damage done to the flesh, and judging by that, it must have been some minutes. Bones sprouted from bloody cracks in the boy's meat, and stringy trails of desecration spilled out of holes which Bartu had no idea how he'd made. He tasted blood, and thought maybe that was why. He swam in a sea of voices, angry voices, frightened voices, confused voices, and he didn't regain his bearings until one voice roared right beside his ear.
Silence! Erupted Temujin.
He was given silence. The men around him stepped away from their sovereign, and Bartu realized that it was Temujin's hands which had pulled him away and held him. The sensation of his sovereign's palms, the palms of his best friend, the hands of a liar and false prophet, pressed against his chest and brought him from the haze of his mind back into his body in the room. His eyes were heavy, both with sleep and weariness. His mouth pulled into a dark scowl, and for the second time that night, a man Bartu loved glared at him with sad disappointment. Bartu tried to move, but he was pinned to the floor. Temujin pressed down against his chest. Two more hands held down his arms, and another pair clutched his ankles. With fury in his voice and grief in his eyes, Temujin said,
Bartu, you are banished.
The lieutenant did not understand and only continued thrashing about. The sovereign grabbed his shoulders and slammed Bartu's torso against the ground, causing his head to bounce off the hard floor. The blow dazed him, and in the stillness he began to understand.
You killed your brother, Bartu. You are a ghost. No man from the clan may ever speak to you again, nor hear you, nor see you. None of the women we possess may ever touch you under penalty of death. You are not welcome in this place, nor in any space that we may share. If you or any man from this clan violate these terms, then they will beg for death, and it will not come until they have forgotten its name. Temujin closed his eyes, shook his head, and then repeated, Bartu, you are banished.
He pushed off and stood with his back turned and his gaze focused on the floor. The hands on Bartu's wrists and ankles loosened. A different kind of silence washed over the basement, a kind of shocked mourning. Glances were exchanged as each man in the room tried to take cues from the others. One by one, they looked at Temujin, and then maybe at Bartu, and then finally followed suit with their sovereign and turned their back. From the silence emerged Kudu's objection.
Banished?
Bartu's heart fluttered in his chest. His co-conspirator, his beloved brother, his sage friend had emerged to save him.
That can't be enough, Sovereign. Sukhotai is dead. You forget who the first brother was, Kudu, replied Temujin. Bartu's crime is unforgivable, but without him there would be no Kudu nor any of you. Bartu began this journey with me, and though it breaks my heart to banish him, it is only for that love that I spare him.
Kudu looked around at the men in the room as if to assess their reactions. They all looked away. Every man was shocked. From his face, Bartu guessed that Kudu realized he'd pushed too far, but Bartu himself knew that it was all part of the cover. The friendship between the two men was well known. Kudu was casting his loyalty with the clan and with his brothers. Through the layers of hurt and betrayal, Bartu admired the move's cunning. No doubt would it come to serve Kudu well when he finally struck. He met eyes with Bartu and grimaced. He shook his head, and at last, he turned his back too. As Bartu left the warehouse, men who had not been in the basement finally took notice of him and watched him with confusion. Bartu stopped before the armory and took a rifle and a pistol and loaded cases of bullets into his jacket. He cast glances at the men who watched him, daring them to stop him. No one tried. Not even when he climbed into the van did any of his brothers, his former brothers, make a move to stop him. Bartu drove into the snow and the night in silence. His whole world left in the warehouse behind him, with no direction, no compass of any kind. Completely alone. Bartu did not have enough left inside of him to recognize the loss. He settled his mind on the one thing he knew he had left. Bartu chose to give himself over to his sickness.
Thank you for sharing my nightmares and helping me carry the grief. If you enjoyed the story, please share your favorite nightmare with a friend or family member, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe. If you want to go deeper, ever wondered what your favorite story reveals about your psychology? I offer story shadow readings where I analyze what your chosen narrative says about your inner patterns and growth edges. I also do psychological tarot readings focused on shadow work and pattern recognition rather than predictions. Links to both services are in the description if you're curious about what insights might emerge. For ongoing support, you can find me on Patreon or buy my books on Amazon. I've linked to both in the description. You can connect with me on Instagram or Threads at Nightmares and Grief. Thank you for sharing this time with me. Good night.